Muted.
Just a moment, a few more people are calling in. All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Hello, my name is Andrew Moore, and along with Alec Buxton, say hi, Alec. Oh, hello. We'll be sharing with you the new Revit content and tools that members of the Revit team have been developing over the past 6 months. The goal of this effort has been to create content and tools that makes it easier for us to work within Revit and more fully realize the potential of the software, while at the same time giving our clients and other consultants a product that can be used without rework on their part. This presentation is mostly geared towards staff that is active in Revit and is not meant to teach one how to use the software. That said, we feel it will be helpful for senior staff to better understand the capabilities that this new content and tools provides us as a firm and the potential for how it can be harnessed in the future. For instance, we will be demonstrating the ability to create fixture schedules within Revit, which is currently not our preferred method on most projects, but we are showing that it is now an option for projects that require us to do so. We are going to do our best to keep the presentation to 45 minutes with 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. To help us meet this goal, we will have muted your phones and we'll be taking questions only through the webinar interface. During the presentation, please submit your questions in the highlighted pane on the webinar control panel as shown on the screen now. We will do our best to answer all your questions, but if we can't get to all of them, we will reach out to you at a later time. With that, let's get started. The agenda of our presentation today is as follows. We'll give you an overview of the new HLB Revit fixture families, explaining the basic logic behind them, followed by a live demonstration of their use. A sample model has been sent out as part of the meeting invite to staff for use during the presentation to allow those who wish us to follow along to do so. If you have elected to do this, please make sure that you open the model using the Revit 2016 viewer, not the full version, to avoid licensing issues. During this demonstration, we will show you the common features of all the fixture families have, as well as how to edit their geometry and add annotations such as tags, zoning information, and keynotes. Then we will explain what electrical connectors are and what information you will need to include in the model so other consultants can make use of our model. After that, we will show you toggles that we have built into the families that make it easy to make global changes on the fly. Then we will demonstrate how to use some energy analysis tools that we have developed, followed by schedules that we have created and built into the new Revit template. Finally, we will answer some of the questions that we have received during this presentation. On the screen now is a legend showing all of the new HLB fixture families. This legend was sent out as part of the meeting invite, so feel free to review it during this presentation and send us any questions or comments that you may have. These families have been created to graphically match the look of our CAD symbols to ensure that our documents appear the same, no matter which software platform was used to produce them. This legend is included in the new Revit template and will be posted to the Revit space as a PDF. We suggest you keep it handy as a reference. Now let me take you through the basic logic behind how these new families were created. You will notice that fixture families are broken up by category, recessed, in-grade, etc. But more importantly, by family. To illustrate this, an example, HLB unhosted recessed downlight is on the screen now. Where before a round and a square downlight were two separate families, now like symbol types are grouped into a single family as much as possible. What's nice about this is that if you were to need to change all of your downlights of a given type, for instance F2, from round to square, all you have to do is click a single toggle and the change is made. Similar features are built into all of our new fixture families with the goal of streamlining our workflow and greatly reducing the quantity of individual fixture families that we have to maintain. With that said, we will now transition to a live demonstration of how you can use this new content and some related tools. For those of you sitting at your desk with the sample Revit model open, feel free to follow along. I will now pass the ball to the brains of this operation, Professor Alec Buxton. Alec.
Hi, everyone. Give me a second to get my screen. Okay, so to kind of start off, we're going to go over the general features that pretty much all of these families are going to have. So that's kind of how we're going to start right now. But first, I kind of want to go over something that might help everyone understand some of the terms that we're using right now. In particular, if you're not familiar, the difference from families, types, and instances. So if everyone can see my cursor over here on the left of the screen, I'm highlighting, these are a list of the families that we have. For instance, in this case, I'm going to start with the troffer. Within that, we then have a bunch of types. In this case, I've created one called F1. And then when I go to place this, this is an individual instance of the family, with the rest of these being the other instances as well. So that's kind of basic that you're going to need to use in order to understand some of the other things I'm going to go over. Okay, so to start off, the basic difference that we've kind of come up with between our old families, which most of us have been using, and the new ones that we've created here can be found in the parameters, which are listed under this edit type right here. So as you can see, there's a significant, if you're familiar with our old families, there's a much larger number of them that we have in the new ones. And we can kind of divide these into, I'd say, 3 basic categories. The ones you see primarily right here, which have the word luminaire in front of them, which in general, just so everyone knows, those are the ones that we've created and we should be using because Revit comes default with some that we can't edit, so just try to stay to the ones that say luminaire as much as possible. The first group is kind of what I'd call scheduling type parameters, and in general, we don't really need to use these unless you are actually using a Revit fixture schedule, which we're going to go over later. So that's things like, you know, what accessories are required, any alternates, the description of the fixture, all of these kind of parameters you don't necessarily need to use. Next kind I'm going to go over are the what I'd call electrical ones. These are ones that you might need to use, and for the most important one would be luminaire input watts. These are for things that if you were going to be filling out your fixtures with wattage information, either for an engineer, if they need to circuit your fixtures, you need to fill out this parameter as well as the luminaire supply voltage parameter. In the past, if we had done this, it would be this apparent load right here. Don't use that. I think we've set it up so that that should equal whatever your input watts is, but that's just a default parameter. The input watts one right here is the one you should use, as well as the voltage. The next kind I would call are probably the most important ones. You'd use these regardless if you're just doing any drafting in Revit, period. First of all is this luminaire type tag right here. This is where if you're going to tag, when you're tagging your fixtures, you fill this out right here, in this case F1, and that will allow the types to show up on your drawings. This is different than what we used to use, which is the default parameter type mark. You should not be using that anymore just because this is the one that is read into our drawings. The other type of important parameters would be dimension parameters. In this case, you know, length, width, trim, height. These are just how the fixture will appear in your drafted model. So for instance, the difference between, in this case, we have a 2x4. If you wanted to make that a 2x2, as you can see right here, fill that out, and now all these families have changed to 2x2s. Okay, so those are kind of the basic categories we have. Other things which aren't as important would be this photometrics section. If we decide to explore the use of things like Illum tools to do calculations in Revit in the future, we'd use this, but that's not really been developed yet, so it's just kind of a placeholder for if we decide to do it. So to kind of sum it up, the important things to use are any parameters which use luminaire in front of the name, and kind of most important being types, and the electrical information following is also pretty important, and then dimensions down here. Okay, so kind of moving on to the next section, which is going to be how we do tagging now. So I think different offices tend to do this different ways, but the primary way that I'm aware of that most of us do is if you're going to tag fixtures, you go into Annotate and you use this tag by category, which you will then select the fixture like so, and it will fill in. So there's a couple of things that are different in the new way we do this as opposed to how we used to do it. The most important one is that our tag itself has been updated to read in our new information. So this should all be present in the new templates that we have sent out, and your Revit team members should be downloading. So hopefully it won't be a big deal, but we do have different tags. So if you tag your fixture and you filled out the parameter and it goes up with a question mark, that means that you need to download the new tag. The other thing we've kind of done with this is, as you can see, we have, right now it's just the type that shows up. If you wanted to do zoning diagrams, as you can see, these have zone listed here, we have a separate tag which is useful for zoning. So just to kind of give you an example, I'm going to select all the tags right now that don't have zones on them, and I'm going to change them right here to from HLB fixture tag to HLB fixture tag with zone. So now I've kind of preloaded some of these with zones themselves, but this new family doesn't have a zone, which kind of brings us to an important distinguishing factor between parameters, which is, as you remember before, I discussed there's family types, which is all these ones you'd see listed here, and then instances. So zone is an instance parameter, which means every different family, every instance has a different value for it. So zone 2, zone 3, in this case it doesn't have a zone. In order to update that, you need to select the family that you are editing. You go over to this properties browser, and you look for luminaire control zone in this case, and you fill it out. So in this case, I'm going to give it zone 2 to match the other one next to it. And now it's filled out. You can do this in bulk if you'd like as well. Just select all the families and just filtering out everything that's not a fixture. You can select them all, and then you can change them all as one right here. So there you go. Now they're all zone 1. So that's kind of that's how we do zoning, and it's also the difference between instance and type, which is going to be useful for us to understand in the future going forward. So now I mentioned how different offices tend to do tagging different ways. The other way that I just showed is called keynoting. So to kind of demonstrate that, in the past, all of our families that were set up to do keynoting, which is a way of embedding the tag with the fixture itself, so that way when an architect or whoever loads in our model, the tag goes with it, whereas this way they have to re-tag them themselves or else use our drawings. So keynoting gets around that, and in the past we had different families for that and different ones for just this method. Now they're all grouped into one, again using instance parameters. So I'm going to select this family as kind of an example. If you want to keynote it, you go over here on the left side of the screen and you click luminaire toggle tag or tag with zone, depending. In this case, I'll do zone. And now it's automatically in there. You can do this again in bulk if you need. And then the cool thing, which we weren't able to do in the past, is now you're able to move them. So people familiar with this in the past, you pretty much had, it was fixed the way it was, and that's just how it was. Now you can move them in two different ways, either one by selecting the fixture and using these kind of grabbing tools right here to kind of shift it where you want. The other way is there you can physically enter in a number if you want right here. So let's just go with that. The other cool thing, which you weren't able to do in the past, is rotate these families. So if you rotated them in the past, and this is just kind of show you, let's say I did 45 degrees. Now, as you can see, this is not readable, which was a problem in the past. We now have the capability of adjusting this. So again, over here on the left, it's a type parameter. You just have to enter in this tag rotation offset, the offset you want to do, and it will rotate for you. And then you can readjust it as needed. So that's how you do keynoting. And yeah, that essentially covers how we do tagging in general. You don't need to do this last one. It's kind of an option that's on a project-by-project basis. You kind of need to decide with whoever's running your Revit. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of move on to another aspect, which Andrew has sort of touched on at the beginning, which is visibility toggles. And to go over this, I'm going to move to our downlight family because it's the most obvious example. So essentially, these are also type parameters, which means every fixture of a type will be changed if you toggle these. They're always grouped under this graphics tab under the edit type. In this case, you can see we have round, square, wall wash, adjustable housing. So let's say for some reason the architect decides they don't like square downlights on your project because corners are sharp and dangerous or something like that. You can toggle them so that they're all round at once. So the important thing to know here is first you have to untoggle the one that it is currently, and then you select the one you want. So square to round, click apply, and now you can see on the right both of these downlights have been changed to be circular. Let's say you want to change it to adjustable as well. You can just click the adjustable downlight toggle right there, and now you have an adjustable family. In the case of the adjustability, that only appears in 2 dimensions. So in plan views like this, the 3D model won't change. However, changing from square to circular does change the 3D model as well as the 2-dimensional one. Okay. So there's also a few things. If you saw this housing parameter right here, in this case, this is a 3D change only. If you want to be a little bit more, if you want your family to not have a housing above for whatever reason, maybe it's just it doesn't have the box above the ceiling or something like that, you can just toggle this and it will change. As you can see, nothing changed in 2D, but if we were to go into 3D, it would disappear. This is just for like kind of basic conflict detection. Our families aren't really set up to do very exact clashing, but it is there for you if you want it. Okay, so that kind of concludes the common aspects of our families section. Just about every family has these or some variation of these types of parameters. So hopefully you should be able to modify the majority of these knowing this. That being said, there's a few more advanced families that we've included, and I'm going to kind of cover those next. The most obvious one, and probably one of the more complicated ones, is track. So you can see right here I've got this F5 and F5A track here. The way we did track is it's divided into 2 families, the track itself, which I've selected right now, and the track heads, which is right here. So first thing to know about track is you can drag the length and adjust the length that way. You can also adjust it over here on the left under this luminaire housing length parameter. So if I want it 12 feet, now it's 12 feet. If I want it to be 8 feet, it's like that. So, but again, you can also adjust it on screen if you need to. The other thing about track is that in this case, we have it pendant mounted. So as you can see in section, this is kind of what it looks like right now with the track and then the head right there. So pendant fixtures, and this applies to all pendant fixtures, are set up to, you can change the height at which they offset from the ceiling. So when you're placing a pendant fixture, the first thing you do is select offset right here. You enter in how high it is. In this case, it's roughly 8.5 feet up. If I were to change that, say, to 7 right now, and now it drops down. I'm putting it back right now. The other thing is that you can do, once you've placed where it's actually connecting, if you want to drop it below, let's say have a 2-foot hanging distance, again, it's a instance parameter found over here on the left called luminaire hanging distance, and that is the offset from the ceiling. So in this case, it's a foot below the ceiling. If I wanted it to be 2 feet lower, now I just change that, and it drops down to 2 feet. But as you can see, doing that, the heads don't move, so you just kind of have to make sure that you mount the track heads at the correct mounting height when you're looking at it in section. Otherwise, you're going to get something weird like this. The track heads themselves are not extremely advanced. They're very similar to the way the downlight worked, so I'm not going to really touch on those. But I am going to move on and talk about another one of our advanced families, which is this channel with individual heads, which is also the same family that we use for combo lights. So the cool thing about this is it will dynamically update depending on the length and the spacing of the heads that you give it, how many fixture heads show up. So if I were to vary the length the same way as the track, you can see it automatically updated the number of heads centered in the length of the track based on our spacing, which can be entered over here on the left. So in this case, it's roughly 1 foot and 3 inches. If I were to increase this to 3 feet, now you can see it respaced and shows the number of heads you got there. Again, you can vary this, and it will automatically recalculate the number. So that's kind of our combo light family. That's pretty much all there is. That's different from the standard families. However, it does bring us to another type of family, which is more common, which is just our typical linear family. So in this case, I have this kind of recessed slot, F3. The cool thing about these is, again, it's dynamic in terms of the way length works, which we had some families that did that in the past. But the useful thing about this is now our wattage can be set, and you can have the same type, which lists different wattages based on length. So to kind of dive into that and show you, instead of the luminaire input watts parameter, which we discussed with the Troffer family, we have this input watts per length parameter. In this case, I have it at 7 watts. So essentially the way this works is it will calculate the total wattage using this and multiplying it by the housing length that you enter on screen. This changes by instance. And that can be useful for whether you're doing energy calcs or whether you're just doing circuiting, if the engineer wants to do circuiting with your fixtures. If anyone recalls in the past, what you would have to do if you wanted to do this with our old families is create like 5 or 6 different types depending on how many different lengths you had, and call it like F3 4 foot, F3 8 foot, and then manually change the wattage, the total wattage, if you wanted to do that. Now we don't need to do that. As you can see, we have this longer fixture here and a shorter one here. They're both the same type, and they both calculate wattage independently. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's this little, when you select the fixture, it lists this little connector element, and essentially it says, so based on this length, it's 188 volt amps or watts on this fixture. It will also list the voltage if you fill it out, which I haven't in this case. So if you see here, it's 188 for this fixture, and it is 133 for this fixture. If I were to change the watts per length, let's say to 5 watts per length, it's now 95. Another thing to kind of note is that this watts per length, it doesn't really matter what the units of length are in it, so it doesn't say watts per foot or watts per meter, as long as you're consistent with what your project units are. So in this case, we're using feet as the primary unit. That means that this needs to be 5 watts per foot to be calculated correctly. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you were doing a metric project, just make sure you keep that in line. So not only is this useful for being able to actually let the engineers use our fixtures to circuit, the other thing that's really cool, which is leading into our next section, is the way we can now do a lot of more schedules or analysis. And the most obvious one in this case would be energy to move to. So this is a very useful tool we've developed. So now when you are doing energy calculations, if you already have a Revit model, you don't need to do a separate energy analysis in Excel or however you used to do it. So this schedule that I put up on screen is just an example, and this is preloaded into our Revit template now. It will calculate based on the spaces, the area, the allowed wattage, and the actual wattage in the space, and will tell you whether your building complies. Now, it's not as simple as that. There's a few more steps, which I'm going to go over right now. And the first thing you kind of have to do is have your spaces set up. So there's kind of two ways you can do this. If the architect is really good about setting up spaces, which is not always the case, you can use theirs. You just got to make sure that not only do they set them up properly, but they're set up properly for our uses, because they don't always do it that way. But if that's the case, then great. You got to be really sure that they did it right. The other way, which is the way I did it here, is I set up my own personal spaces. So there's kind of a few steps to that. First is you have to have a floor plan view. In this case, I set up HLB space plan. The second thing is we have created view templates that allow you to do energy more easily. So in this case, it's also preloaded into our Revit template, HLB energy floor plan. I select that, and now you can obviously see where the spaces are. These are all a bunch that I kind of set up prior. But to kind of show you how you create your own, I'll use this space right here. So you go to the Analyze tab, and then you go to the Space Separator. And again, this only works in floor plans. It then allows you to start sketching. In this case, it's just a square, so I'm going to use the square tool. Draw that line. And then the next step is to click Space and drop it in there. You can then give this a name. It'll pre-use a number, but if you have a specific room number, you can apply that as well. So then once that space is set up, if we go back to this HLB LPD schedule, you can see that I filled out closed office, and there it is. I'm going to make it all caps because I have OCD. So the other important thing to do is once you have your name set up, you can see it's already calculating the area. The other thing to do is to choose a space type. So you do that in this schedule, and you click this little button right there. And Revit is preloaded with what I believe, and that's because I use Title 24 out here primarily, but I believe it's set up with ASHRAE 90.1 space types. So you can search for them. Let's see, in this case, I'm just going to go for office. So office enclosed. And you can see it has all this energy analysis data over here. For us, the only one that matters is this lighting load density. Again, I believe these are ASHRAE 90.1 values. I'm not 100% on that. You can change them yourself. I'd recommend you double check it anytime you do it regardless, but in my case, I use Title 24 anyways, so we have different values. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm going to assume it's 0.9 watts per square foot. So you just enter it in, and it fills that out right there. Click OK. You can see it's populated here. It lists the watts per square foot allowed here, which also calculates the total watts in the space based on the area. And then the actual lighting load. So right now you can see we have 0 watts in the space, which if we go back to plan, we can tell is not actually the case because we have a bunch of troffers in here. So this brings us to the next important thing to realize is that when you draw spaces, they don't always go all the way up to the ceiling. So I drew a section. I'm in that section view now. I'm going to apply. There's also a section template for energy, which I've created, which also is preloaded into our Revit template. Click OK. And now you can see the problem. The space only goes up to about a foot below the ceiling, which means our fixtures are not included in it. So essentially you have to raise it up and make sure the fixtures are in this space, either by just dragging it like that, or by you can enter it in on the left here. It's called limit offset. It's 12 feet. Now it's like that. But regardless, the fixtures are in this space now, so it should work. So if we go back to the LPD schedule, you can see it did work because now we have 87 watts in the space. which is 0.52 watts per square foot. You can see this category here lists that there's 62 unused watts in the space. In spaces that are over it, it will say negative numbers. And then it will tell you whether or not the space complies. In this case, yes. In the case of this pantry space, it's no. And then over here on the right, it says, does the building overall comply? And the answer is yes. So that pretty much lists everything you need to know about energy. However, how can we be sure that it calculated everything correctly? We've also set up 2 other spaces, both with LPD in the name, schedules, sorry. Also with LPD in the name to help you kind of verify that. First is this expanded one. It has all the numbers used in the back of house calculations, which are all kind of described up here. I won't go into depth with it. It also lists the individual fixture instances in each space. All of this is kind of useful to check and see whether your fixtures have the right wattage and things like that. However, this isn't the only thing you have to watch out for. The other thing you have to watch out for, which is probably more common, is do you have fixtures that are not in spaces at all? Because if they're not going to add to the calculation. So that's why we set up this LPD space schedule here, which if you have a fixture that's not in the space, which is the case with this F3 fixture right here, it won't list a space over here on the left. So that's a very easy way to see whether or not you have a fixture which is not being calculated. In this case, I'm not going to spend the time trying to fix it just because we're short on time, but you'll just have to kind of work through it to make sure that you have everything being calculated. And once it's all in here, it pretty much is good to go. Another thing which is useful to know is you can export these schedules if you want to do any additional analysis. It'll export it to a text file, which you can then import into Excel or whatever you want. I'm not going to go over that today, but if you have any questions on that, just feel free to reach out to the Revit team. So yeah, that's essentially how you do energy in Revit, which all of our families are set up to do now. Another kind of schedule is a pretty obvious one, which is our lighting fixture schedule. As Andrew touched on, we don't necessarily think this is a use this for every project kind of thing right now. It's you got to decide based on your project. But if you do have a project that requires fixture schedules in Revit, we now have that capability. So in this example, we've kind of filled out all of our types with some kind of just example information based on fixture schedules we've done in the past. As you can see, you have a category for images here, which you can fill out. The type is listed here, the location, description, all your photometric information can be listed, as well as the driver slash power supply type. Input watts is listed. Now the important thing to notice here is that for your linear fixtures, which might have a bunch of different total watts, it reads in the watts per foot or watts per length parameter. So just watch out for that with your linear fixtures. But all the other ones, it should just read in the total. Manufacturer, catalog number. This is a good example for a new type of parameter, which is multi-line text. If anyone's messed with this in the past, you know that filling out, for instance, this, if I had to fill out a long catalog number in this parameter, it would be very difficult and hard to check. Revit now has the capability of you filling out in multi-line, so I can just add in lines and spaces, and it will automatically fill it out like that. This also kind of brings up something. You can edit this information either in the schedule itself. It'll just prompt you with this. You just say OK. Or you can edit it in the edit type window, which I've been over before, like this. You just fill it out here. So moving back to here, we also have alternates, accessories, and our remarks that we can fill out here. This is maybe a better example of the multi-line text. So yeah, okay, another thing that's important to know about fixture schedules, and this also applies to all other schedules, is only fixtures that are actually placed in our model get read into this. So that means that if you, let's say, we had all these F1s on our project, but then for some reason we need to cut them, and I just deleted these in the drafting view, then it no longer populates the schedule. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to delete these two F2s right here. And now back in the schedule, you can see F2 is no longer here. So that's useful because it means you don't have to double check your schedule. If you delete something in the drawing, it's already deleted from the schedule. And just kind of a note, I'm not going to go over it today, but if you want to add more fields to this schedule or delete fields or something, you do have that capability. It's just modified over here, but again, I'm not going to really touch on it today for the sake of time. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to the Revit team. Another type of schedule we've created, which is useful either internally for us, is now we can do quantity takeoffs and pricing in Revit. So you don't need to do the pricing if you want to just see what your quantities are. All of them are automatically listed in here in terms of units in this case. So for the troffer, we have 12 units. In the case of the F3, which is our slot fixture, it also reads in the total run length. So as you could, if you remember from our drawing, we had 2 fixtures of 2 different lengths. So we have 2 units, and they add up to 45 foot 10 inches. It's very useful, especially for larger projects. And now, if we wanted to do a quick pricing information, let's say I figured out that the troffer fixtures are $200 each. I can fill it out here, apply to all fixtures. So it's $200 per unit, and the total for the project is $28,000 essentially dollars. Same thing works for linear fixtures. In this case, you don't fill out the per unit, you fill out the per length. So again, be consistent with your units when you're doing this. But let's say that it's $50 per foot. I just fill out 50, and now it calculates that there's $45-ish thousand worth of fixture on the project. The totals are calculated down here as well, so you can also get a very good indication of what the total budget of the project is, whether you're over or under. And just in case you wanted to make this all in one schedule that you can export, you could also fill out what the lead time is here if you have it. Let's say this is an extremely fast lead time fixture. So yeah, that's essentially how our quantity schedule works. The final schedule that we kind of created is this load schedule. So this is useful for if you do end up doing zoning in the project, as we did in this kind of example. It divides it up first by level, as you can see right here, and then by space. So the open office is right here. We have 3 different zones on it, Zone 1, Zone 3, and Zone 4. The control type of each of these zones can be listed here. The type of the fixture that's on each of those zones is listed, as well as the load type. And then the quantity and total actual wattage that is on that zone are also listed. So you can use this internally. If it's the project you think it makes sense to send it out, you can do that. But essentially, that is how you can kind of quickly at a glance see what your zoning is on the project. One thing to note is that your fixtures need to be in a space in order to do this. If you don't want to break out each individual space, like bathroom, closed office, copy room, you could just literally just draw one giant space around the entire model and it will read it in, but you just need to make sure that you have it created that way. So yeah, I think that essentially covers the new features that these families have, as well as how we are able to use them. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Andrew.
Thank you, Alec. Now let's see what questions have been asked. Alec, I think we might actually want to leave you as the presenter.
Did you get bumped off?
Sorry, I tried to unmute everyone, and apparently that mutes everyone.
All right. Samantha asks, how do you tag a fixture so that it shows up with the luminaire tag instead of the type mark?
So, if I'm understanding correctly, you mean you want this parameter to show up and not this one, which we would usually do. So the way that works is essentially, and hopefully this won't be a problem because we've preloaded all of the templates in the future with this, but essentially we just created a new HLB specific tag. And you can see right here, HLB annotation fixture tag with zone, or just fixture tag. So essentially you just tag it as normal, and if you have that tag loaded, it'll automatically do it for you. So it shouldn't be a problem. But if you do see a question mark when you do it after filling out that luminaire type thing, just make sure you have the proper tag loaded into your model. Which, again, any questions on that, reach out to the Revit team. We can help you with that.
And I'll say, if our answer to the question didn't fully resolve your question, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll follow up. San Francisco asks, if we aren't coordinating fixture family housing size for clash detection, etc., do we need to worry about filling those fields out?
I would say no. At that point, you can just make your families filled out in order to make it look properly in plan. No more than we would do in CAD. Like if we had a 4-inch downlight, ideally the downlight symbol in CAD would be 4 inches. So same thing goes for Revit. But if you're not doing actual clash detection, don't worry about it. I mean, these families aren't really set up for clash detection, like the really detailed kind that some clients want. If you're going to do that, you kind of either need to work through manufacturers or something like that. But for basic clash detection, they are. But if you don't even want to do that, again, just make them look right in plan, and you're probably good to go.
Right, they're set up for the LOD that we typically use on projects. But I will say that the housing sizes that come out of the box are relatively standard on what you'd find on fixtures. So the initial settings are good to go unless you really do need to modify them.
Which brings me to something which I think I forgot to mention earlier. As you can see in this Troffer family right here, we have a bunch of presets set up. So in this case, we have a 1x4 basket, 1x4 lens, 2x2, 2x2 lensed, etc. Same thing. Pretty much all of these families, if there's something you can do with them and modify the way they look, there is a preset for it. So if at the most basic level, if you really don't want to worry about that, you should be able to just kind of duplicate one of these guys and go, and you're good to go. So.
San Francisco asks, are the control zones permanent, or can we use them just to give control intent to the electrical engineer, i.e. they will use their own circuit numbers?
So this luminaire control zone that we have here is just kind of an HLB parameter, which is inherent to the fixture. So while they will be able to see that, if they were to load this into their model and click Edit Type or just review the properties, unless they have our tags, it won't show up. Now, I know a bunch of different engineers do different methods of circuiting. I believe, however, that they should be able to set that stuff up on their own end, and it's kind of independent from our control zone. This is really more for our drawings and for our internal kind of schedules, which we can provide to the engineer if they want. And they can see in their model if they really look for it, but it's not going to be apparent. It's not going to populate their schedules unless they really try to make that happen.
Okay. San Francisco asks, should we just use the toggle keynote tagging always so they are always tagged correctly?
No, I don't think.
I would think no. I think someone's trying to... Okay. My thoughts are that unless the architect specifically wants to have that keynote toggle thing in, then you shouldn't do it, because otherwise pretty much any view that has light fixtures in it will populate with that tag, is my understanding. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. It's more of a convenience thing. I think people from Boston might understand that better because it sounds like you guys tend to do it a lot more often than us. But my first instinct is no.
Okay, Barrett asks, does the keynote copy when a fixture is copied, or do you have to check the toggle box for every fixture?
It copies.
Okay. What if the track is recessed or surface mounted? Is there a toggle option?
I believe so. I did this a while ago. Let me check. Yeah, so we have this pendant-mounted track toggle. I'll click OK. And now it's surface mounted. If you wanted to recess it, just accommodate for that and put it above the ceiling. It'll show up.
Okay. Similar, or the Michael Lindsay asked, similar to a combo light, do we have a dynamic slot and dot version? So funny enough, we noticed a couple days ago that we hadn't actually gotten around to developing this, and that will be coming in the next couple of days, and we'll have that put on the Revit space.
For now, if, like, let's say I get swamped and I can't do it right away, or someone else can't fill it in, you can just make this a single. Here, I'll just quickly draft it while we're doing this, but you can just take the one lamp version and a recessed slot, and then you can just line them up, and it looks essentially right. Just make sure you're watching all the little things behind the scenes like wattage and such, and obviously you'd want these two things to have the same width so they match up, but it essentially will get the point across for now, but yes, we are eventually going to have one of those.
Okay. Michael also asked, how is the allowed wattage determined in the schedule? Is it ASHRAE Title 24? I think Michael came in with this question before you explained that, so I think we've covered this.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't remember, I mean, it's essentially you can change it yourself. If you want us to go over it again, just let us know. I'll let you know offline.
Samantha asks, is the slot family tiltable?
No, not yet. I believe we have a surface-mounted, hosted version, which, by the way, all these families are unhosted for now. There's a couple families that are hosted, and I believe the linear is one of them, which allows you to do that. However, we don't have a out-of-the-box tiltable family yet. That's the other one that's on our list.
San Francisco asks, can you expand schedule rows to be able to see multiple lines of text?
Yes, but not in the actual schedule view, so not when you're in this, but when you create a sheet, so which I think I have one set up. Yeah, right here. This is kind of what it looks like on the sheet. It'll fill it out based on, you can set the row, the column width, either right here or in your lighting fixture schedule with this. And so I make that 5 inches. So that'll do that, but the actual row height doesn't show up until you're on an actual sheet. And that's just based on the amount of content.
Okay. New York asks, can the architect also move keynote tags?
I would think they have to open up our model.
Okay. New York also asks, if we send the engineer several revisions of our model, do they have to recircuit our fixtures every time?
I think that depends on the way the engineer does circuiting, which I believe there's different methods. However, the method I am familiar with, if you, let's say, just move one of these families, I don't think so. If you change the wattage or if you change the way it looks, I also don't think so. But if you delete a fixture and re-add it, I believe the answer is yes.
I think that's just the circuiting follows the instance. Okay. New York also asks, can our fixtures tilt or be mounted to a surface that is angled? I think we covered that, Alec. The question regarding a linear fixture, that would be the typical answer for all the families, correct?
I think linear, we're going to try to make it an actual tiltable family similar to what we had before. That being said, if you want to do a fixture on a slanted surface or something, which is a slightly different issue, you just need to use a hosted family, which honestly, it's kind of easy to make them hosted. It's just a little bit time consuming to do all of them. So I've been kind of doing it on an as needed basis. But if you have a family you want to do that, it's really quick to just let the Revit team know, and as long as we're not all 100% busy, we can do that.
Okay, great. New York asks, can we put the fixture schedule on a sheet if we need to? I think we just showed that the standard template already places on the sheet. So I think that answers that. Have the templates been saved to Office's HLB Revit template folder? I sent out an email this morning to the Revit team asking that the latest and greatest families and templates be downloaded from the Revit space. Reach out to your local Revit team member to confirm that's been done. New York asks, will control zone tags be on a separate layer when exported to CAD?
I don't believe so. I think the way, and this is something I'm not as familiar with, I think the way it exports for us is that any annotation, meaning zone, tag, even just lines, all go onto the HLB text layer or something similar, whereas light fixtures go to the lights layer. So that's something we can look into in the future to see if we can make it go separate, but for now, I think the answer is no.
Okay. Barrett asks, can you show once more how you made your own space versus using the automatic space assigning? And where is space tag located in Revit?
Okay, so first of all, you have to be in a floor plan, ideally with the view template that we've set up, Energy Floor Plan. So if the architect's already set up the spaces for you, I think it's a schedule toggle. Yeah, so if the architect had set up spaces, you'd go into your schedule, you'd click Edit Fields, which brings you this window, and then you click Include in Elements in Links. I'm not sure if this sample model has any. It looks like they don't. And they'll populate automatically. And then any fixtures that are in those spaces will automatically add up to the wattage. If you're doing it yourself, you got to go under the Analyze ribbon right here. Space separator, that's how you draw them. So let's say I wanted this table to be its own space. You just do that, and then you have this line, and then you just click space, which again, Analyze, Spaces, Zones, Space. It clicks it there. It automatically tags it. I think you can delete that if you wanted to, but I don't recommend it. And then you can just fill it out however you want. And yeah, that's essentially how you create them. And then I believe if anyone wants to, well, essentially then it populates in the schedule, so then you can fill out what type it is and all that information. I think that answers that.
Yes. Barrett also asked, is there a way to incorporate a toggle into the control zone being on or off?
I think we tried playing around with that originally. The way to do it is not a toggle, but just to select the ones you don't want to have the zone. So in this case, if we wanted them all to not have a zone, I'd just say select all and, oh, wait a minute, I just realized. Keynotes or tags is different. So if it's just a tag, you do all in project, you go up here, and you just change it to tag. If you want to do it to keynotes, let's just say in these cases, these are the only two fixtures we have keynoted. You select all the ones you want to change, and then you just change it from luminaire tag with zone to luminaire tag. I think that should cover it. It's relatively easy.
Right, and San Francisco had a similar question, so I think we've answered that. Maura asks, do we have a family for illuminated handrail, or is one on the way?
So I think essentially that tiltable family and or the surface-mounted linear is what's going to cover that. If you guys want a specific one that looks exactly like a handrail, we can create it. It'll just take a little more time.
And last question from Barrett. if we have a project already set up, can we switch out the template to be our new template with scheduling?
So if the families are already the new families, or even just I know there was a limited release of families before they were kind of finalized, if you have those families in it, all you have to do, you can do it. It's not like swapping out a template. You'd have to, and I've done it a few times myself. You'd either open up this sample project or create a new project with a new template that has these schedules in it. You'd need to create a sheet and place the schedule on it like this. You can then just Control-C, copy, move over to your other project, and paste it onto another sheet you've created there, and it will automatically populate it into the new project. And then whether or not the fields fill out is dependent on whether or not your families are the correct ones. So I guess the answer is sort of.
Okay, so now with all the questions answered, I'm going to take the ball back again. So as we wrap up, I would like to remind you all that if you ever encounter a Revit issue that you cannot solve or have an idea for a new feature, feel free to either reach out to a member of the Revit team in person or email us at revitteam@hlblighting.com. As you can see from all the friendly faces on the screen, we have a sizable group of staff that covers all HLB offices that is ready to help you with your questions or discuss your ideas. This rollout is certainly not the end of our efforts to create new content and tools for your use, so reach out with any thoughts that you have or how we can improve on what we haven't introduced today. At this time, I'd also like to thank the Revit team and others pulled into this process for all the effort they've put into helping us create this content, brainstorm new features, and prepare for this presentation. We couldn't have done it without them. We hope that you will enjoy working with these new tools and that they make your work easier. All this content has been downloaded to your local server by a member of the Revit team and is available for your use. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to the Revit team. Thanks for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Nicely done.
Thank you.